The Dallas Cowboys traded for an all-pro defensive back on Tuesday. What does that mean for the defense in 2023? All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked on
Cowboys.
Locked on Cowboys.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. I'm joined, as always, by Landon McCool. Check him out on Twitter at McCoolBCB. Landon, this is 2 days in a row the Cowboys have made a move. It's wild.
Yeah, totally crazy. I mean, I certainly would call it unexpected. We kind of got rumbling only minutes or moments before it could happen on Twitter. And then suddenly you start, speculating on what names it could be. And then, it's suddenly you're finding out Stephon Gilmore is a newly minted Dallas Cowboy. That's how quickly these things happen,
Pretty incredible. So the official trade is the Cowboys are sending a 2023 5th-round pick. I believe it's their first of their 2 compensatory picks. I believe it's pick 176. But for
right.
all-pro cornerback Stephon Gilmore, who doesn't turn 33 until September, what were your initial reactions when you heard about the trade?
Well, I think the first thing I went through was kind of once we heard that it was potentially a cornerback that the Cowboys were trading for, and then obviously as we start going through names, we start talking about different folks. And once Stephon Gilmore's name came on, I have to relay what I told you, and sometimes it's tough to mea culpa, when you're wrong on this show. But my Stephon Gilmore memory, at least my most recent one, was having a conversation on this show the week that the Cowboys played him and played the Colts, and saying something to the extent, I don't know that I went all in on it or anything, but I definitely said something to the extent of, Stephon Gilmore is not the player that he used to be, and he can be taken advantage of. And one of the big, I think we all kind of say things before games, and then there's times when we watch the game unfold and we're like, man, that did not roll out like I thought it was going to. One of the big ones that I remember from last year was how wrong I was about Stephon Gilmore. He kicked Dallas's butt pretty hardcore when we played at the Colts. He had a really good game that week. And kind of just going back and watching some of him before and seeing some of the games, like he looked way better than the guy that we saw in Carolina that one year after he had left New England. So, and I think, kind of digging a little bit deeper, we learned a little bit more about a meniscus surgery that he had before last year that he felt had kind of cleaned some things up that he had been suffering through. And it kind of felt like he felt rejuvenated. And honestly, I mean, if you kind of just go by, again, I know how you feel about it, but I don't know how other folks feel about PFF numbers. But if you go by the PFF numbers, his grades last year were incredible, top 10 if I remember. So I think it bodes well that the Cowboys were able to get him for less than $8 million and a 5th-round pick.
Yeah, let's talk about those numbers really quickly. According to Pro Football Focus, 92nd percentile coverage grade, 93rd percentile coverage grade in single coverage, 98th percentile grade in the slot. He was awesome last year.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, if you get a chance to watch that Cowboys-Colts game again, he only allowed 20 yards and had an interception, but that wasn't even his best game. He had a game early in the season on a Thursday night against the Broncos, one of the worst Thursday night games you'll ever see, where he basically won them the game. Like the Broncos had a chance to, all they needed was a field goal at the end of the game to win it, and Russ threw an interception to Gilmore.
That step in front interception was it looked too easy, honestly. He just it was right there and just stepped right in front of it like he was catching the ball as a receiver.
I'm not going to dismiss the possibility that the wheels fall off at age 33 because it happens to corners. But based on what I saw last year, the wheels haven't fallen off yet. Like he was an absolutely elite player, which I think is important, remember, because you're not trading for a player that's damaged goods right now.
Yeah.
He is coming off a very, very good season.
Yeah, this is a different situation than the kind of and listen, Cowboys fans are rightfully gun shy on this. This is a different situation than the buying low on a once great player who has had an off year. He had an elite year last year. He
like
really did.
Gerald McCoy or something like that.
Yeah, it's like this is a situation where he had an elite year last year. He still looked really good. He played all 16 games. This wasn't, this isn't a buy low situation at all. This is a team in the Colts that is looking to rebuild. They're looking to clear some money off their cap. Just to mention, they also just announced that they released Matt Ryan, and those two moves alone cleared off $21 million of cap for them. So they're looking to move on. They're looking to rebuild. This isn't a situation where this guy wasn't a good player for them, and they're trying to get rid of him. This was a situation where they need to get rid of. They're starting over. They need the money more than they need the player. And the Cowboys got a really good deal, and the picks as well. But I think for the Cowboys,
I was going to ask you, what did you think about giving up a 5th round pick?
I mean, that's, I think look what the trade market is looking like right now. I mean, you traded a Ramsey for a song, basically. Stephon Gilmore getting a 5th compared to, Ramsey getting a 3rd seems appropriate, so I just think that it makes some sense. It's the corner market right now, especially for trading for big contracts. It seems like it's a little bit team friendly at this point. So the cost is low. And the Cowboys got a situation where, honestly, I mean, the money is fantastic. That's what I can't get over.
Too money, right? Like, look at the guys that are getting paid in free agency. Like Cam Sutton's getting $11 million. Patrick Peterson, who I think is a lot closer to being washed, is getting $7.5 million. Like, this is more than fair.
Oh yeah, Patrick Peterson didn't have nearly the same year that Gilmore did. So yeah, I think this is one of those situations where, and the funny thing is, obviously this is an emergency pod. Earlier today, we were just discussing how we felt like if they needed to, they could go into the situation retaining Jordan Lewis and then potentially, drafting a corner and going with that, and Mukwame as a mix. What they've done instead is to double down on this situation to put even more teeth into that defensive backfield. Suddenly, this defensive backfield is now markedly better than it was last year. I mean, no offense to Brown or to Lewis, or to the other folks that are in the defensive backfield, but your younger players got a year better, and you've now exchanged a very talented Brown for a guy who is a former defensive MVP candidate, and a guy that can come in and actually be another playmaker, not just a solid option, And again, one more thing that I think that you pointed out that I wanted to get back to was his slot grade number.
98th percentile. Yep.
Having a guy who can play opposite of Bland, like, fits so beautifully, right? Now you're not having to necessarily pigeonhole either Bland or Gilmore to an outside corner or an inside corner role when they kind of excel at both. So I think those two pieces fit really well together as well.
I'm glad we're doing an emergency podcast because we've got some breaking Cowboys news.
Oh boy,
I don't want you to look. I like to surprise you.
I haven't looked yet.
We'll get to it next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That has bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything and anything from money lines to point scores to three-pointers drained. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So don't miss a chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 back in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That is FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Leighton, some breaking Cowboys news. Are you ready? You didn't.
I'm ready.
You did see.
No, I didn't. But making me sit on through the commercial break was cruel. That's but fine. I did not peek. My hands are behind my back.
Kind of ties in a little bit to the defensive theme here. The Cowboys have officially re-signed linebacker Leighton Vander Esch to a 2-year deal worth $11 million, with the first year being guaranteed.
Excellent. Excellent. So we're talking 5.5 million. Is that somewhere in the range of that?
Yep.
We'll see the exact numbers the first year are, but I would assume it'd either be 5.5 to 6.5, maybe. I like that deal a lot. I mean, that's kind of. I mean, honestly, did you nail that? Isn't that almost exactly the numbers that you mentioned?
Yeah, basically, because that's what the market was showing, right? Basically, 6.5 to 5.5, just depending on your age and stuff. It felt pretty easy. And the show that we did a little bit earlier today was he was asking for 7, which we knew wasn't going to happen. So here we go.
And it's funny, I even tweeted out like a little bit later with that tweet and then a Gelkin tweet, which seemed to be the counter offer, which was Cowboys are exploring other linebackers. They kind of like this other guy.
Nicholas Morrow.
Yeah, Nicholas Morrow. That's right. And I was just like, man, it's nice to see that the Cowboys, everyone's negotiating through proxies on Twitter. Yeah, I mean, I love it. Obviously, Leighton Vander Esch had another guy who had a really great year last year. Came back off of an injury situation, and just really thrived. Obviously, a little bit younger situation, but still similar kind of theme where they were able to bounce back. They looked fantastic after looking healthy for the first time in a little while these last 2 years with Leighton, and he had a prove it year, and he proved it. And then he came back and he got a little bit more in a longer term contract. And I think he's such a great fit in this defense, because you have so many light, quick, gap players up front. You're playing a lot of times undersized a defensive tackle. And so having a bigger guy who can be a kind of a physical force in the middle of your defense, who can also physically drop into coverage and be a useful player as a drop player. Because he's not just like a lot of these other kind of Mike or Sam's who are only good at playing forward. Leighton can drop into coverage. I mean, you're not wanting him in man coverage every snap, but he can do a lot of the kind of in the middle of the field Tampa 2 stuff. He can drop deep if you need him to. He has that sort of athleticism, and his length is just so valuable in shutting down passing windows. So Cowboys really doing a lot to not just shore up the defense, but I think improve. Clearly, they're doubling down on their defense, so that's encouraging to see, to say the least.
I think it's pretty clear that they want to keep that defense elite, and they want to have depth at a lot of spots. And we can go back to Gilmore really quickly, but now you've got, depending on what happens to Jordan Lewis, you've got 4 cornerbacks that you really feel good about, on top of 2 picks in Calvin Joseph and Nashawn Wright. And let's not forget, because we mentioned him on every single show, Israel Makamu, who plays both positions. It's clear that they want to have a dominant defense again, especially if they're going to have less than stellar playmakers on offense.
Yeah, I mean, at the very least, they're going to ensure that they can shut teams down defensively, and they're not, choosing between pass rush or coverage. They're choosing both. They're going after Gilmore. They're talking to Fowler, like we talked about. They're overloading the pass rush. They're overloading the cornerback depth.
Still need a couple of defensive tackles to bring back.
Yeah, of course. But I mean, they'll get those guys later. And that's the thing, right? Is that you want to find like maybe 1 or 2 more premier talents at defensive tackle. One more premier talent at defensive tackle would really, I mean, and this defense is
I just don't know how you
ready to be tops of the league. That's the thing, is that's it at this point, is that it's not available at necessarily at the draft. It's not available in free agency from what I've seen. And those guys are not very tradable right now, because interior pass rush is such a commodity, like such a lack of supply, that the demand is incredibly high. So teams aren't exactly willing to part with that unless you're willing to pay a pretty hefty price for a guy that you feel like isn't going to re-sign with your team for some reason or whatever. And it's just a pretty small list, to be honest.
So overall, feeling pretty good about the defense as we stand here in free agency, right?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I as you worried about attrition, you worried about taking losses. Cowboys haven't taken losses at the defense position. They kept their defensive coordinator. They've kept yeah, exactly. I mean, let's start there. They kept Quinn. They kept their linebacker, who had a really good year. They kept their safety, which ensures that they have their 3-headed safety, which is a huge part of their defense. And now they've actually upgraded the cornerback situation. So you got to feel good about where the defensive arrow is pointing, and that's not even including guys like Deron Bland and Clark and Williams, and that are all going to improve and be better players next year. Golston, yeah, exactly. So, and maybe that's, maybe a 3rd-year jump is what we're looking for in Golston, being kind of the defensive tackle that you would want to plug in there and take more reps, maybe as a starter. So, the arrow is definitely not even just like down or pointed, like flat. It's pointed up, and that's a really encouraging thing, especially if the Cowboys can't find a way to cobble together another wide receiver or some sort of special playmaker on the offensive side of football.
I really love both these moves, especially bringing back Leighton Vander Esch, because at $5.5 million over 2 years, and again, that's what's being reported now, and you know how this
works.
What the numbers.
The
numbers are going to come in less than that, just because that's what happens. I love these moves. It really keeps the defense at the very top. You have a lot of depth, and with how many picks they have? 10 picks this year.
Yeah.
They're going to be able to add more depth to the talent, more depth to the defense. However, there is one thing I took away from these two moves in how it's going to affect the Cowboys in the draft. Let's talk about that when we come back. This episode is brought to you by the Ultimate Football GM app. You've heard us talk about this mobile game before. And if you ever thought you'd make a good GM and you could be better than Stephen Jones, you've got to give this game a try. Although Stephen's on quite the heater today. It's not quite as easy as you might think to create a dynasty. When you play Ultimate Football GM, you get to control and manage every strategic aspect of your team as you play through seasons and lead your team to glory, trying to build a historic dynasty. With Ultimate Football GM, you are going to be responsible for controlling the destiny of your franchise by hiring the right coaches and coordinators, navigating all the finances, including negotiating player salaries and the terms. Plus, you've got to do all the free agency stuff, the draft, there's injuries, there's personalities you have to deal with, and all the ups and downs of the season. All of this in a challenging but realistic game world. Ultimate Football GM is completely free and playable offline, so you can play on the go as you want to and when you want to. Locked On Cowboy listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code Locked On in the game store. That is Locked On, all in caps. So make sure you check it out today. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up in the app stores. That is ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. All right, Leighton, after the Cowboys brought back Donovan Wilson, after they signed Leighton Vander Esch, after they traded for Stephon Gilmore, it's hard not to look at this team and think this is going to be a very offensive-heavy draft, especially early on. Is that the sense that you're getting?
Well, I mean, it fits their kind of general pattern of kind of alternating defensive and offensive drafts, right? Mm-hmm. So, and I think they at least they've solved a lot of the issues that they had at on the defensive side of the ball. And I'll point something out too. Like one of the conversations that you and I had, it may have been about the cornerback position, but I don't remember specifically. I think it was that when you take care of business in free agency at a position like cornerback that has great depth in the draft, every single one of those corners who gets drafted above you is working for you by pushing all the other players that you want to draft down to you. So and clearly the Cowboys are going to get that benefit. And beyond that too, they also are getting the benefit of a draft heavy with cornerback by being given the opportunity to trade for Stephon Gilmore. You have to think that the Colts were looking at this really, really deep cornerback draft and wanting to kind of get another more bites at the apple in the draft. So that probably played into it, feeling that they could get a cornerback which provided the opportunity for the Cowboys.
Just to be clear, though, the Cowboys aren't going to ignore corner in the draft. Like I'll guarantee they're going to draft one, and that's where the depth and the talent's going to help you, though, because you might be able to draft a corner in the 3rd round, and maybe most years goes 55th, right? Yeah. Or a guy that that's super long and athletic, but needs some time, right? He needs a little bit of time to develop. What better spot to develop than behind Stephon Gilmore, Trevon Diggs, Jordan Lewis, Deron Bland? Like, it's a good situation the Cowboys are in.
Yeah, and even then, like even for like stuff like training camp, you don't necessarily have to put a bunch of wear and tear on Stephon Gilmore because you've got a lot of young cornerbacks who need snaps all during that time too. So there is lots of kind of symbiotic relationship stuff that's going to be good about having a veteran in that room for not only just for Trayvon to have like another guy to kind of bounce off. Hey, what's it kind of like to be a superstar in this league for long term? But the younger guys just learning technique. So. And yeah, I do to answer your earlier question, I do wonder now, is this going to be a kind of offensive heavy draft? Are they setting themselves up for a situation where they could take an offensive lineman or a wide receiver in the first round, tight end or something in the second round, and just really kind of focus on getting younger and just injecting some youth into this offense, which, has been kind of holding on and relying to players for a little bit and reliant on kind of veteran bodies in those spots. And maybe they're trying to inject some youth into this group.
All right. A couple of nuggets on Leighton Vander Esch, Stephon Gilmore before we go. The Houston Texans and the Steelers both made last minute pushes. Always feels nice to beat the Steelers at something. So excited about that. This one from Todd Archer. The Cowboys and Eagles had discussions today about Darius Slay. Ultimately didn't happen.
Interesting. That's interesting. That's so interesting to me. Like in the Cowboys and Eagles have conversations, right? Yeah. Well, that's interesting.
I think I wondered if they were just like wanting to know, hey, how much money would you be able to take on? What's it going to cost? Apparently, according to Archer, the Eagles called Dallas, and Dallas wasn't really interested. But worth noting.
It is worth noting. That's interesting that they're so interested in moving on from Darius Slay at this point.
Yeah. So all things considered, I mean, I know it's going to come off as biased or whatever, but listen, I'm not somebody who has just given the Cowboys a lot of praise in the off seasons, but I think
they deserve it today.
Yeah, pretty good day.
What's the rule? When it's the stuff we don't like, it's Stephen Jones that does it, and when it's the stuff we do like, it's Will McClay that does it, right? That's fair. But I think it's fair to say that the Cowboys front office had a really good day today, absolutely, by pretty much any measurement. So good job for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Now we get to see what they do with the rest of free agency. Do they turn their attention to the defensive tackles, maybe Jonathan Hankins, maybe a Carlos Watkins, or do they continue to add more pieces? There's a lot of linebackers that are still out there.
Yeah.
There's Dante Fowler, who you mentioned. Maybe they get in on the edge rushing market. We shall see. That is it for today's show. Thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every day. Now make your second listen to Locked On NFL Draft Show. Damian Parsons and Keith Sanchez provide in-depth coverage of the biggest NFL draft prospects with deep dives into the sleepers and hidden gems that can change your favorite NFL franchise. Find Locked On NFL Draft wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Check us out on YouTube. You guys know we post shows every single day over there. Go follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosher, and we'll see you guys next time.